But let me start by maybe giving you guys a list of shows, and I'll tell you what they all kind of have in common, right? So hear me. All right. Mad Men, Breaking Bad, Walking Dead, Preacher, The Shield, Weeds, Orange is the New Black, House of Cards, Ray Donovan, and The Affair. Right? So what these shows all have in common is that they were all initially either like floated or like fully developed for a long time at HBO, which we all think of as literally like the gold standard of television, literally the gold standard of quality TV, and making sure that the quality is there. You know what I mean? But with a lot of these shows, what ended up happening is like, there was kind of, maybe some of you guys remember, in the early 2010s, there was a little bit of a dry spell for HBO. Things weren't going super well. Execs were kind of starting to worry about job security. This is like when I think, Richard Plepler was kind of making his way up and stuff like that. And like, things weren't as great as they had been in the early 2000s, the era of The Wire and Oz and, all those big shows that had kind of been on the platform at the time. So there was just kind of this like anxiety, this kind of fear. And then at the same time, there were these new, basic cable platforms, and Showtime had always kind of been like their big adversary, I guess you could say. And Netflix was the new kid on the block. So there were these other places that were kind of like just excited to take a bite out of HBO. And there were so many great ideas, such a big industry out here in LA, that there were a lot of projects to just kind of like pick up and be like, oh, you guys developed that for a little bit at HBO, and you guys no longer want this, and you don't think there's any promise in this, like, let's take it. With the Mad Men example, for example, Matt Weiner, who was literally in the writer's room on The Sopranos, was walking around with that for years in his bag, just kind of like, all right, like, yeah, I've got a lot of good experience writing on this show. I'm kind of ready to kind of do my own thing and kind of move on. He had this whole world that he had already kind of pictured for Mad Men and stuff like that. And as he developed it at HBO, they never really, Carolyn Strauss, that was the was kind of running things at the time. She wasn't super into it, and which seems like an obvious miss and an obvious blunder. And I'm sure she looks back at that in many other projects we've never even heard of, or specifically this project. But like, she probably looks back at other projects as well, and is kind of like, dang, I kind of dropped the ball on that one. How did I let that one go to AMC and kind of become what it became? You know what I mean? Obviously, same thing for Breaking Bad and Weeds and these other shows. They'd worked with these writers before, and like it just didn't really work out. And again, I think that comes from that place of overthinking, of wanting to make sure you're doing the right thing, of having an established brand. And I think that that's something that like just needs to be kind of like looked at on a team by team kind of basis of like, hey, are we getting what is the real deep reason that we're kind of losing out on titles that are going to other platforms? Although I will say too that I think that's a good reason to not just have one kind of like behemoth in a region. You know what I mean? That's why it's good to have other homes and other buyers, so that like your manager or agent can be like, okay, didn't work out here, not the end of the world. We can shop this around. At least it's already developed. Kind of look at the bright side in that way. So like that I think that's what I think sometimes happens. That's what I think